Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. If there's one game that's sure to excite a lot of PlayStation 4 owners, it's going to be Uncharted 4. So Naughty Dog, who of course the game's creators, are currently working on the title to finish it, and the co-directors of the title, Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, have recently conducted an interview over a Game Informer with a podcast. And so the two co-directors have given indications of what it's like to work on the PlayStation 4 and exactly what their goals are in terms of the performance for the title. So, in regarding the PlayStation 4's performance and how they're finding working on the machine, he said, and I quote, this is Straley, "It's like butter, it's smooth, delicious," which is an odd phrasing, I guess. It's actually pretty amazing, to tell you the truth. There are things that have been issues in the past that aren't issues at all right now. It's funny because of how quickly you forget that this used to be an issue. That said, like every piece of technology, what Naughty Dog does is that we push the limits to anything and everything that's in our eyesight, so in our reach. So yeah, that he did say it like that. At this point, Druckmann, who of course is the code producer, also chimed in, and he said that they're just always limited resources on, of course, hardware technology. And then Straley conceded this and said, "Yeah, but all those problems that used to exist are pretty much gone at this point. We just have to come up with new problems." Now, at that point, of course, the logical question would be, well, how are you finding the frame rate, and are you going to hit the 60 frames per second? Now, to give you a bit of background on this, the reason so many people are curious on the whole 60 frames per second is when The Last of Us Remastered was first unveiled for the PlayStation 4, Naughty Dog, this is not an exact quote, not verbatim, but in so many words, said that they wanted all titles of theirs to hit 60 frames per second. They said that it was basically the way forward. And now they said, and I quote, "It's in reaching 60 frames per second for Uncharted 4, it's, and I quote, really fucking hard." I mean, that's true for any game. It was really hard for The Last of Us Remastered, and that's a game we'd finished, and we know exactly what the end results need to look like. And here we are trying to push the boundaries of what a game can look and do real-time cutscenes, and trying to do 60 frames per second is really hard. And then he was pressed, well, do you think you're going to actually be able to achieve the 60 frames per second? That doesn't really tell anyone anything. And he said, well, I just don't know. The objective for us is to make the best possible experience. Right now, we're trying to push the look, and then we'll see where we're at, and then we'll reassess. We're constantly making choices throughout the production, though. What's going to make the game feel best and look the best? So, I personally don't necessarily mind 30 frames per second on a title like Uncharted. I know some people really hate 30 FPS on action type of adventure games, but I don't think it's the end of the world. I would prefer 60. As well as the most important thing, however, it's a stable 30 FPS. So, to give you a bit of background, if you remember the original Last of Us, which he uses a reference point, it's kind of like they knew already what the game was like. In other words, they knew the areas, they knew how many enemies were on screen, they knew roughly the draw distances they were going to be using, they knew about the details of the model. So really, the main differences for Last of Us Remastered, we've done a comparison on the channel if you really want to look at it versus the PS3, but one of the big differences, of course, you've got higher resolution and 60 frames per second, and that hoovers up, it vacuums up a lot of GPU time. A hell of a lot of GPU time. Just going from 30 to 60, literally half the amount of time that the GPU has to render each frame, so it's quite expensive to pretty much double the frame rate. But a lot of gamers were hoping for 60 FPS because they were kind of expecting it given previous comments, but it's possible that with the rather beautiful aesthetics of Uncharted, I mean, if you were to take a look at even any of them, for the time period they were released on the PS3, they looked incredible. I remember when the original Uncharted was released on the PS3, and many actually at that point weren't really impressed with the PS3's hardware. I think it's fair to say that the PS3 wasn't, awful, but it was very difficult to program for, and honestly, people just didn't really think it was going to be as impressive as the Xbox 360, at least to many people's minds. However, at that point, it wasn't just these guys, but of course other developers as well were really pushing things. But Uncharted 4, at least in my opinion, was really the title which propelled the PlayStation 3 into kind of the eyes of others and say, oh, you know what, the PS3 can compete graphically with the Xbox 360, it's just a bit harder to manage. And obviously Sony did improve the SDKs and development kits and various other bits and bobs to make the system easier to develop for in the long run. But if you look at Uncharted 1, Uncharted 2 especially, there's some like ice caves in it, and it looks absolutely breathtaking for the time. And of course it's fairly reasonable to say that Uncharted 4 naturally is an extension of that. It looks very, very bloody impressive indeed. So I don't necessarily mind 30 FPS on Uncharted 4, but obviously if these guys just say it's too difficult to do, in other words, you've only got a finite amount of hardware, at the end of the day you have to make a decision. Do you go for larger draw distances, better shadows? Do you go for better textures or higher resolution or more enemies on screen or whatever it is? Because at the end of the day, we don't know what at the moment is causing the performance to pretty much tank on their system. It could be that they are GPU bound, it could be that they're CPU bound, it could be that they're running out of memory bandwidth, it could be a dozen different things. And at the end of the day, the code is also not finished, it's unoptimized, so who knows what the end result is going to be. I kind of wouldn't mind, in my personal opinion, let's say that the game averages, and I'm just using this as a pure example, averages like 45 to 50. I wouldn't mind if they allowed the game to be locked at 30, but then for you to unlock it with the caveat of, you know what, it's not probably going to hit 60, but if you want the, if you're not too sensitive to visual tearing and so on, and you prefer, the frames basically to render as fast as possible, then that's all you, and I think it would be the better solution. Furthermore, I would like to also point out one last thing. The Last of Us Remastered was definitely an improvement over the original. The original Last of Us, and I've said this a few times, the original Last of Us on the PS3 tanked several times in frame rate, and I do mean tanked. It was not as bad as Unity level of tanking, but it did certainly dip to the mid-20 range, particularly when there was a lot of particle effects on screen or water effects. It really ravaged this GPU, and I'm not quite 100% sure why, but I have a feeling some of it as well is to do with just physics in general. It really just absolutely hammered the system. But when they translated that to the PS4, yes, for the most part, if you're in a very serene environment and there's not too much going on, 60 frames per second, yes, you would hit, but it also would dip below 60. And an extension to that, might I add, is that there was actually a visual difference between 30 FPS and 60 FPS. I kid you not. There was actually a difference in shadow quality, and I believe, and though this is memory only, maybe LOD quality as well, but I definitely remember that when I was doing some testing, there was some shadow quality difference. In other words, the game physically would make the game look a little bit prettier if you opted to lock at 30. And so that kind of gave us as gamers, at least console gamers, a rare decision to make. Do you want the faster frame rate, but do you want it to look a little bit worse? And I also wouldn't mind that, I think, for other titles as well. I would like Naughty Dog to kind of set a precedent here and have the option, hey, do you want to lower, say, the internal resolution? Maybe it goes to 900p or whatever they need to do and run at 60? Or would you prefer that 30 FPS lock but have the game look as absolutely gorgeous as possible? And I would be totally okay with that. I think that's a decision that many people can make, and maybe it would automatically start at 30 FPS and then gamers can make the decision themselves if they do want to unlock that frame rate and just kind of let them know what the impact would be. And I think for the most part that would solve a lot of people's expectations, and it would also solve a lot of arguments. But for some reason, a lot of developers are just not too keen to do that. Although sometimes it could also be CPU-bound issues and whatever else, and so we don't really know all of the all of the facts and figures, so it could sometimes be a bit more difficult to justify that option. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.